Right now, at this exact moment, the amount of summer sunlight hitting the northern half of this planet is close to the lowest it has been in 800,000 years. Every single time this has happened before, an ice age started. Glaciers a mile thick, half of Europe buried under them. It has not started, and nobody is entirely sure why. Somewhere between the 8th ice age and this one, something has reached in and stopped the clock. This video is about what that something is, and why the people who found it are not exactly celebrating. Ice ages are not random. They run on a schedule. 3 separate wobbles in the Earth's orbit, stacking on top of each other like gears in a clock that nobody built on purpose. One gear takes 41,000 years to turn. That is the tilt of the axis, rocking back and forth like a spinning top losing its balance. Another gear takes about 23,000 years. That's the wobble of the axis itself, like a top that's about to fall over but never quite does. And a third gear is the shape of the orbit itself, stretching from almost a perfect circle to a slight oval and back. That one takes 100,000 years. None of these gears cause an ice age on their own. It is when all 3 line up at once, in such a way that the planet tips. Scientists figured out this whole system by drilling into the Greenland ice sheet and pulling up cores of ancient air, trapped in bubbles 100,000 years old. Each layer is a snapshot. Stack enough of them, and you get a weather report going back nearly 1,000,000 years. Here is the part that should worry you a little. Right now, the gears are lined up almost exactly the way they were the last 8 times an ice age began. But it is not happening. So either the clock is broken, or something else got in the way. And there is a second question sitting right underneath the first one. If the clock really runs on schedule, how close did we come to living through it? Is it us, or our grandchildren? That answer turns out to be more specific and more uncomfortable than most people expect. Chapter 1. The Trigger. An ice age does not start because the winter gets colder. It starts because a summer fails to do its job. Snow falls on the far north every winter. That's normal. The whole system depends on one single event the following summer. Does the snow melt or not? If the summer sun is strong enough, the snow melts, the ground goes dark, and it soaks up heat again next year. Business as usual. But if the summer sun is weak, even slightly, the snow survives. White snow reflects sunlight instead of absorbing it, so the ground underneath stays cold, which means next winter's snow lands on top of last year's snow that never left. That's the whole mechanism. A cold summer that fails once, then it fails again. And the reflecting snow makes every summer after it colder than the last, because there's more white surface bouncing the sun away every single year. It works like a switch. Once conditions are right, it flips instead of drifting. And somewhere in the last few 100,000 years, that switch has been thrown 8 separate times. Once it starts, it does not need any more help. The ice makes its own weather. More reflected sunlight means colder oceans. Colder oceans mean drier air. Drier air means less rain to wash the dust and soot out of the atmosphere, which means the remaining snow sits there, undisturbed, waiting for the next layer. Give that loop a few thousand years, and it does not just cover the north. Sea level drops by roughly 400 feet, because that much of the ocean is now sitting on land as ice. A person standing on the coastline of California today would, at the height of the last ice age, have been standing dozens of miles inland from the actual shore. So the question isn't complicated. The sun is weak enough right now to throw that switch. It has thrown it every previous time conditions looked like this. So why hasn't it thrown it this time? Chapter 3. The Accident. The same team ran the model forward instead of backward. They asked what happens to that 240 threshold once humans start adding carbon instead of just barely staying above it. Without any human emissions at all, the next ice age was already due in roughly 50,000 years. That's not a small number. It already made this particular warm period, the one we're standing in, longer than almost any other gap between ice ages on record. Then they added the carbon we've actually put into the air, and the carbon we're still on track to add. The 50,000-year gap didn't shrink. It doubled. 100,000 years. Moderate future emissions. Somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 gigatons of carbon are enough on their own to push the next glacial cycle back by at least that long. To put that number somewhere your brain can actually hold it, 100,000 years ago, there were no cities anywhere on Earth. No writing, no agriculture. Modern humans had barely left Africa. That is the size of the gap this study is describing, measured from today going forward. The lead researcher on this study did not call it good news. He called it something closer to an accident. Burning oil, coal, and gas was never a plan to stop an ice age. It happened to do that anyway, the way knocking over a bookshelf might happen to block a door you didn't know was about to open. We are, by the researcher's own description, skipping an entire glacial cycle. That has never happened before. Not once in 800,000 years of this clock ticking. Every other species that has ever lived through one of these transitions, every mammoth, every early human ancestor, experienced the gears turning exactly on schedule. We are the first thing in the history of this planet to reach into the mechanism and jam it. And we did it without knowing the mechanism was even there. So the puzzle from the very beginning of this video is solved. The sun really is weak enough to start an ice age right now. It just no longer matters because we changed the other half of the equation without meaning to. But solving one puzzle opens a much less comfortable one. Here is the open loop this video planted twice. Why didn't the last ice age happen on schedule? And how close did we come to missing our own window entirely? Both answers are the same fact, looked at from two directions. Pre-industrial civilization ran on an atmosphere sitting 40 parts per million above a threshold that, if crossed, buries continents. That margin was thin enough that a slightly colder ocean or a run of unlucky volcanic winters could plausibly have pushed it the other way. And then, without any coordination, without anyone at the time understanding what a molecule of carbon dioxide did to sunlight, humans spent 2 centuries pouring exactly the compound needed to widen that margin back into the sky. Nobody voted on this. Nobody in 1850 knew there was a switch, let alone that they were holding it shut. The Industrial Revolution was not trying to cancel an ice age. It was trying to run machines. Every coal seam burned for a factory floor. Every early oil well drilled for lamp fuel was, without a single person alive at the time understanding it, a small deposit into an account nobody knew existed. The bill for that account is still being calculated, and it is not a small bill. And yet the researchers are clear that this is not a reason to celebrate fossil fuels. The same emissions that likely postponed a slow, gradual burial by ice are simultaneously producing a fast, ongoing crisis on every other front. Rising seas and extreme heat arriving in years instead of millennia. Delaying a threat that was 50,000 years out does nothing to soften a threat that is measured in decades. This is the twist the whole video has been walking toward. The thing most likely to end human civilization in the near term is the exact same thing that, by the numbers, may have already saved it from a much older and much slower ending. We did not plan the rescue. We may not survive what the rescue cost. There is no version of this story where a scientist in 1850 sits down and calculates the exact carbon output needed to hold off a glacial inception, then quietly starts a coal plant to make it happen. What happened instead is closer to 2 catastrophes colliding at the right angle to partially cancel each other, while a third, smaller catastrophe kept building in the gap between them. 12,000 years ago, the ice retreated, and everything we call civilization grew in the gap it left behind. Every language, every building still standing. All of it happened inside a warm window that was never guaranteed to stay open. We now know that window came within a rounding error of closing on its own. And we know, separately, that the thing keeping it open today was never a decision anyone made on purpose. The ice does not know it was stopped. The carbon does not know what it prevented. It is simply sitting in the atmosphere, doing a job nobody assigned it, while causing damage nobody intended either. Everything about this story happened by accident. The margin that almost let the ice back in. The pollution that happened to widen it again. Nobody designed any of it, and nobody is steering it now either. We are living inside the side effect of a side effect. So here is the question worth sitting with. If the accident that may have saved us from one disaster is the same accident causing another, what does that tell you about how much control we actually have over which future we end up in?